Paul Mauro, former NYPD inspector, joins us this morning. Great to have you here, Paul. Look, the FBI just confirmed that they no longer believe other suspects were involved in the New Orleans attack. Are you surprised about that? What do you make of it?
I'm not surprised, actually. So some of us who were commenting on the air yesterday alluded to the fact that the evidence that seemed to be supporting the idea that he had active accomplices was rather thin. Now, it wasn't entirely clear that they didn't exist, but it looks to have been based upon the fact that there is video of a number of people walking up on and encountering a cooler which reportedly held some IED components. Fortunately, they were not active. They see it, they tape it closed again, and they walk away from it. It looks to me like they just came upon it and thought it might have beer in it or something because it's a cooler on Bourbon Street. So that seemed to be the basis for why they thought there were accomplices in the area. But that does still leave out a couple of sort of hanging chads here. You had the two confirmed devices, pipe bombs with nails in them, that were planted at locations away from the site of the actual attack, away from Bourbon Street. And so you have to say to yourself, okay, then by definition, Jabbar must have planted those himself. What was the plan? To try to remotely detonate them, draw law enforcement away, try to maybe at some point during flight from the incident, try to get to them so that he had more weaponry, which is a tactic we've seen in other cities. So there are still some open questions about what went on here relative to those other devices.
You know, even more disturbing, I think, is the fact that he was a U.S. citizen who'd served in the military, did a tour of duty in Afghanistan. It's one thing to have a terrorist from the outside slip across the southern border, but this is the enemy within. You know, that is more than disturbing. And would you say the threat is still there from other places that we simply have no idea?
So I've been overusing a line on the air, and I'm just going to default to it again, and that is that the further we get from 9/11, the closer we get to 9/10. And that really, for those of us who worked in this space for a long time, we were hyper aware of the fact that the threat had not gone away at all. Thankfully, the public had moved on from it. Good. That's what you want the public to do. We don't want ourselves to be sort of, you know, hyper aware of this stuff at all the time so that we can't live our lives. That's why it's so important that the Sugar Bowl is going forward, which I think is great. But those of us who worked in that space know that the threat has not gone away. We're in a period of that's really historical. And these things move in the space of decades or even centuries. And the fact that we had then the Gaza incident and the events of 7 October only heightened that atmosphere. So no, the threat hasn't gone away. The internal threat is still there. Fortunately, the mechanisms to interdict it are still there, the JTTFs and other measures that were put in place post 9/11, but they have to be utilized, and they have to be muscular, and they have to be energized. And I think that there is some feeling that we've taken our eye off the ball there a little bit, especially at the federal level. And I think 20 January comes, we're going to see our eye go back on that ball.
You know, Paul, this comes up a lot when we have these kind of attacks, but we live in an open society in America. We're very proud of it, the freedom of speech and movement, but with it becomes these threats. And it's impossible, is it not, to track, you know, someone who may be radicalized online, even if they go online and make horrible, predictions about what they want to do. It's very difficult to stop these things from happening.
Yeah, that's a very perceptive question because that is exactly where the tension in these things are, right? In a society that has a robust First Amendment, which is the most unique aspect of our system, it's why it's first. You have that continuum of freedom of speech, and then you have to decide where does that continuum end and where we get into something that can actually be acted upon by law enforcement. And that is a little bit of a gray area. Law enforcement, lawyers, prosecutors struggle with it. It's why you have to go to a judge and get a subpoena, get a search warrant, all of those things for protections. But at the end of the day, the openness of our society, the strength of our society can sometimes turn into one of our weaknesses.
It can indeed. Paul Mauro, terrific stuff, Paul. Thank you for your insight today. We do appreciate it.